My family kicked me out at 16 to protect my sister. Years later, they bought her a house, but when I bought mine, they sued me to take it. But the judge read my childhood story and destroyed them in court. I'm 34 years old. I work in industrial equipment sales, and what I'm about to tell you basically sums up why I haven't spoken to my parents or my sister in the last few months, and probably never will again. The thing is, I recently won a lawsuit against them, a lawsuit that should have never existed in the first place. And I'm still struggling to process that my own family took me to court to try to take my house away from me. My house, the one I bought with my own money after years of busting my ass working. But I guess I should start from the beginning, so all of this makes sense, because the truth is this conflict goes way back. It goes back to when I was basically a kid, and my parents decided that my sister Tiffany was the princess of the family and I was, I don't know, the scapegoat or something. I grew up being blamed for everything, absolutely everything. Tiffany is 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she could do whatever she wanted, and somehow it always ended up being my fault when things went wrong. A plate broke? Stephen did it. Money missing from Mom's purse? Stephen must have taken it. Tiffany got bad grades? Obviously, Stephen distracted her or didn't help her with homework. It was exhausting, you know? Living in a house where you knew that no matter what happened, you were going to be held responsible. I remember one time, I must have been like 12. Tiffany drew on her bedroom wall with permanent marker because she was mad at Mom about something. I don't even remember what. I was in the living room watching TV when I heard the screaming. Mom went upstairs, saw the mess, and Tiffany immediately said, "I did it," that I had gone into her room while she wasn't there. I didn't even defend myself at that point. I already knew it was pointless. They grounded me for 2 weeks, and I had to pay for the paint with my allowance for a whole month. Tiffany never faced any consequences. That's how my entire childhood was. Basically, my parents, Mom, and Dad still struggle to even use those words to refer to them, honestly, lived in this bubble where Tiffany was perfect and could do whatever she wanted. They bought her everything she asked for. She had the biggest room, designer clothes, the newest phone, everything. I had the basics, what was necessary, and if I wanted something extra, I had to earn it or buy it myself. I started working mowing lawns at 13 because I wanted to have my own money and not have to ask them for anything. Already at that point, something inside me knew I couldn't depend on them for anything. The breaking point came when I was 16 years old. Tiffany was already 18 and had just gotten her driver's license. Well, actually, she'd had it for like 6 months. Dad had a car he loved, a 2005 Mustang or something like that. It wasn't new, but it was pristine because Dad took care of it like it was his child, more than me, ironically. The point is that one Saturday I was at a friend's house studying for a math exam. I have witnesses for this and everything. And Tiffany took the car without permission to go to a party. She drove drunk, lost control on a curve, and crashed the car into a pole. The Mustang was destroyed, completely totaled. Tiffany called Dad, crying from the hospital, where they took her to check her out. Luckily, nothing serious happened to her, just some bruises, but the car was a total loss. When I got home that night, around 11, I didn't know anything about what had happened. I walked through the door, and there were Mom and Dad sitting in the living room with faces I'd never seen before. I thought someone had died, seriously. Dad stood up, and before I could ask what was wrong, he yelled at me about how dare I take his car, that I had destroyed his Mustang, that I was irresponsible and a liar. I tried to explain that I hadn't been anywhere near the car, that I had been studying with David all afternoon. But Dad didn't want to listen. Mom didn't say anything either. Just looked at me with that expression of disappointment I already knew so well. Tiffany was upstairs in her room, obviously, and when I asked why she wasn't down there, explaining what really happened, Dad just said she had already told them everything, that I had taken the car and then tried to blame her to save myself. It was surreal, you know? Like being in a horror movie where everyone is crazy except you. I begged them to believe me, told them to call David, to check whatever they needed to check, but Dad had already made his decision. He told me I had 3 days to pack my things because I wasn't welcome in his house anymore. That if I was going to be a liar and irresponsible, I couldn't live under his roof. I remember just standing there in the hallway, unable to process what was happening. My mom finally spoke and said I could go live with my grandmother, Dad's mom, who lived like 2 hours away. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she wasn't basically kicking me out of the house at 16 for something I didn't even do. I called my grandmother that night, crying, and told her everything. She knew me, knew how things were in my house even though I had never told her everything in detail. She told me to pack and come to her, that I would always be welcome. Those 3 days were the worst of my life up to that point. Tiffany didn't even have the courage to talk to me. She stayed locked in her room. My parents barely spoke to me. I packed my clothes, my books, the few things I had, and my grandmother came to pick me up in her old Civic. When I got in the car and saw the house in the rearview mirror, something inside me broke. I didn't cry. I just felt like an emptiness in my chest, like a part of me had just died. Living with my grandmother was the best thing that happened to me, even though the circumstances were horrible. She was like 68 at the time, a retired teacher, and lived in a smaller town than where I had grown up. She enrolled me in the local school. I helped me get a part-time job at a supermarket, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone actually cared about me. Not because they had to, but because they genuinely cared. She asked me how school went, cooked my favorite meals, let me use her computer for homework, normal things that any parent should do but that were new to me. Meanwhile, my parents kept spoiling Tiffany like always. I finished high school living with my grandmother, and when it came time to decide what to do next, I knew traditional college wasn't an option for me. I didn't have savings, and I definitely wasn't going to ask my parents for help. I enrolled in community college and worked full-time at a warehouse to pay for classes. I studied business administration because I thought it would help me get a decent job. My grandmother supported me in everything, encouraged me when I was tired, reminded me why the effort was worth it. Tiffany, for her part, went to an expensive private university where my parents paid for absolutely everything. Full tuition, dorm, food, a new car so she could get around campus, everything. In her second year, they paid for a 2-month trip through Europe with her friends because she deserved it for her good grades, even though I later found out she was almost failing all her classes. During those years, my parents called me maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Sometimes they didn't even remember my birthday. I talked to my grandmother every day. She was my real family. When I graduated from community college, I got a job in industrial equipment sales. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well if you were good, and it turns out I was good. I worked there for like 5 years, lived with my grandmother all that time, because it helped me save and also I enjoyed her company. She was already older, had occasional health problems, and I liked being there to help her with whatever she needed. Meanwhile, I kept hearing stories about Tiffany through relatives who still talked to me, aunts and cousins who didn't understand why my parents had treated me that way. Tiffany had finally graduated. It took her 6 years to finish a 4-year degree, and my parents bought her a house. A whole house. Nothing big, like 2 bedrooms in a normal suburb, but it was a property worth easily $200,000 at that time. I kept saving every penny I could. I had a plan, you know? I wanted to buy my own house before I turned 35. I wanted to have something of my own, something no one could take away from me, something that proved I didn't need my parents for anything. I worked in sales, did extra jobs on weekends, invested what I could in stocks and funds, basically sacrificed any kind of social life or luxuries for years. I didn't go to parties, didn't go on vacations, drove the same old car for almost 10 years. Everything went into the savings account for the house. When I was 33, a little over a year ago, I finally had enough for a down payment on a decent house. I found a perfect property, nothing ostentatious but in good condition, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, in a quiet neighborhood. The price was $320,000. I could put down 20%, and the bank approved the loan without problems because I had good credit and a stable job. When I signed the purchase papers, I felt a satisfaction I can't even describe. This was mine. I had achieved it completely on my own, without anyone's help, well, except for the emotional support of my grandmother who always believed in me. Here comes an important part that my parents would later use against me. When I bought the house, I decided to put my grandmother's name on the deed along with mine. It wasn't a complicated legal decision. It was basically symbolic. I wanted to honor her, acknowledge that without her I wouldn't have gotten to that point. She didn't put a penny into the house. All the payments came from my account. The loan was only in my name, but on the deed we both appeared as owners. My grandmother cried when I told her. She hugged me and said I didn't have to do that, but I insisted. I told her it was the least I could do for someone who had given me everything when my own family abandoned me. Things with Tiffany, meanwhile, weren't going well. I had heard through the grapevine that she was having problems with her house, that she wasn't paying the installments on time, that she was in debt with credit cards. About 2 months after I bought my house, I found out from an aunt that the bank had started foreclosure proceedings on Tiffany. She lost the house. My parents had to put in all their savings to pay Tiffany's debts and prevent the matter from completely affecting her credit. They basically ended up with nothing for retirement because they pulled my sister out of the financial hole she had dug herself. I didn't feel sorry, honestly. I felt a kind of poetic justice, I guess. For years they had ignored me while giving her everything, and now she had wasted all of that while I, the disposable son, had built something solid on my own. Not that I was happy about their problems, but I definitely wasn't going to cry for them. My grandmother kept living with me in the new house. I converted one of the bedrooms into her space, with her own TV and her things. She was already 84, and her health was slowly declining. Nothing dramatic, just time taking its toll. I took care of her, took her to her medical appointments. We sat and watched movies at night, cooked together on Sundays. I was happy, really. And for the first time in my life, I had a home that felt like home. Then my parents showed up. They called one day. It was Mom who called, and said they needed to talk to me about something important. I told them to come to the house, whatever. They arrived that afternoon, and from the moment they walked in, I could see on their faces they were coming to ask for something. They sat in the living room, looked around with these expressions I couldn't quite read, and Dad finally blurted out that they had had financial problems helping Tiffany, that they had lost their savings, that they were worried about their future. Then he asked if they could move in with me. That the house had space, that I surely would want to help my family, that they had heard my grandmother lived with me, so obviously there was room for them too. I sat there processing what they had just asked me. These people who kicked me out of their house at 16, who abandoned me, who never supported me in anything, who gave everything to my sister while I managed on my own, now wanted to live in my house. The house I bought with my money, with years of sacrifice, without their help at all. I told them no. Simple and direct. I told them they weren't welcome in my house, that they could take that however they wanted, but my answer was no. Dad turned red, started saying I was ungrateful, that they had raised me, that I owed them something. Mom tried the emotional angle, saying we were family and family supports each other. I responded asking where that family was when I was 16, and they blamed me for something I didn't do. Where that support was when I was working 3 jobs to pay for my education. They didn't raise their voices after that. They just left. My grandmother, who had heard everything from her room, came down afterwards and hugged me. She told me I had done the right thing. My grandmother passed away 3 months after that visit. It was peaceful. In her bed. At 85 years well lived. I was with her, holding her hand. It was devastating, but there was also something peaceful about knowing she didn't suffer, that she left calmly and surrounded by love. I miss her every day. She was the only person in my family who truly loved me unconditionally. After the funeral, which was small and quiet like she would have wanted, I thought I could finally move on with my life. But then, like 2 weeks later, I received a legal notice. My parents were suing me. The lawsuit basically said that since my grandmother was a co-owner of the house and she had now passed away, half of the property became part of her estate. And since Dad was my grandmother's only child, he had a right to that half of the house. They wanted me to either sell them my half or sell the whole house and split the money, or just give them half the value of the property in cash. We're talking about more than $160,000. I couldn't believe it. I literally stood there staring at the papers, unable to process that this was happening. They were suing me for my own house, the house I paid for, trying to use a legal technicality to steal what was mine. I hired a lawyer, her name was Patricia, and I explained the whole situation to her. I showed her all my bank statements, the mortgage payments, the purchase contract, everything. I explained that my grandmother never put money into the house, that her name was there only symbolically, that I had been the one who paid absolutely everything from the beginning. Patricia told me we had a solid case, but that we still had to go through the legal process. First, we had mediation, where basically a mediator tried to get us to reach an agreement without going to trial. My parents showed up with Tiffany, who was also there supporting them because of course she was. The mediator tried to get us to agree, suggested that maybe I could give them a smaller amount of money as compensation, that it would be faster and cheaper than a trial. I told them I wasn't going to give them a single cent, that if they wanted something they would have to fight in court, and that it would become clear there who really owned that house. The mediation ended without any agreement. We were going to trial. The trial was about 4 months ago. Patricia presented all the financial documents showing that every payment for the house came from my account. She showed the mortgage loan that was only in my name. She brought my grandmother's bank statements showing she never made any transaction related to the purchase of the house. She basically proved with irrefutable evidence that I was the only one who had put money into that property. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that regardless of who paid what, the law said that if my grandmother's name was on the deed, she was legally a co-owner, and therefore her portion of the property passed to her heir, who was Dad. Patricia countered with something called a constructive trust, basically a legal concept that says that even though something is in your name, if you didn't contribute financially, and the name is only there for non-economic reasons, you don't have a real right to the property. She brought my testimony, where I explained that I put my grandmother's name as a symbolic honor, not as an actual transfer of property. She brought testimonies from aunts who confirmed how my parents had treated me my whole life, establishing a pattern of favoritism toward Tiffany and neglect toward me. It was brutal, honestly. Seeing all my childhood pain exposed in court was reopening wounds I thought had already healed. The judge took a few days to deliberate. When the day of the ruling came, I was a bundle of nerves. If I lost that case, I would lose my house, or at least I'd have to sell it or go massively into debt to pay my parents something they didn't deserve. The judge reviewed all the documents, heard the final arguments, and finally issued his ruling. He said it was clear from the evidence that I had been the sole financial contributor to the property, that my grandmother's name on the deed was purely nominal and without intention of actual transfer of property, and that applying my parents' argument would result in unjust enrichment on their part. He ruled that the house was 100% mine and that my parents had no rights to it. He dismissed the lawsuit completely. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. Patricia hugged me. I almost started crying right there in court. My parents and Tiffany left without saying anything. I had to pay the legal fees, which were like $20,000. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny to defend what was mine. Since then, I haven't spoken to any of them. I blocked their numbers, their social media, everything. A couple of aunts and cousins still talk to me and have told me that my parents are living in a small apartment, that Tiffany lives with them because she can't support herself, that they're bitter, and say around town that I'm a horrible son who abandoned his family. I don't care. Honestly, I lost my real family when I lost my grandmother. They were never really my family. They were just the people I got by accident of birth. Now I live in my house, the house that is completely mine, confirmed by a judge. I work at the same job, I keep paying my mortgage, and I'm building the life I always wanted. There are moments when I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have been more compassionate or more flexible. But then I remember everything I lived through, everything I had to overcome alone. And I know my decision was the right one. I didn't owe them anything, and I definitely didn't owe them my house. Sometimes I think about my grandmother and how proud she would be that I defended what was mine, that I didn't let them walk all over me again. That's enough for me.